Well, I want to apologize to our YouTube viewers who didn't have the pleasure of seeing me last week, but you did hear me, so we had a little bit of a glitch in our camera, and that happens with all this technology that's going on. So you wonder sometimes if we're advancing or what we're doing exactly, because we're all expressing a growing dependency on our electronic devices. And as much as I love them, and I have one here, and we have 3 computers running, I think, this morning, and usually one of them has some kind of a bellyache that we have to deal with before we get this show on the road. But it's wonderful that we can, from here, speak to people all over the world. And I think that's the upside of it. So we're going to continue to grapple with technology and do whatever we have to do to make it work for us. So today I'm talking about spiritual adaptation, and this kind of rises from a question that was raised about prayer. How do you see prayer, and the theme that you are focused on, that is the soul is now complete. So I'm calling this spiritual adaptation, the key to genuine communion. And as I have pointed out, the word prayer comes from one of the meanings, Aramaic meanings, comes from the word slotha, which means to make an adjustment. And I think this is easy to overlook, to make an adjustment. What would making an adjustment have to do with prayer? So you have a problem, and you're looking for an answer. And one of the things Jesus said is, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you've received it. And that's the key to the meaning of prayer. When you have a need, you say, I have a need. There's something I don't have here, and I need it. So that's acknowledging that there is a lack. There's something that needs to be fulfilled that's not here at the moment. So Jesus is saying, well, you need to make an adjustment in your thinking. Whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you've already received it. Don't treat it as something that's separate from you. And it's that simple. To act as if that which you desire, that which will solve the problem that you have, is here now. And that's what it's really all about. Get to the point in yourself where you can actually know this, you feel this. You may not see the manifestation of it, but that it is all working toward your highest good, that the greater good is now here, that all that is needed to bring it about is here. And so that's what I want to talk about, spiritual adaptation. So one of the experiences Jesus had was, I love this particular line and the response to it, the fact that the people that heard him speak were baffled, because apparently they knew him quite well. And as he gave some of his gems of truth, they asked, how did this man get such learning without having been taught? And they're wondering, where did this wisdom come from? They saw him grow up. He was somewhere in his 30s, I guess, around the time he would have conducted his ministry. So they saw him probably from birth on to that point, and figured he had not been gone anywhere, so how did he get all this information? So we have, in human consciousness, we have 2 layers. We have one that draws all of its information from the intellect, through the eyes, the ears, the senses, the 5 senses. And we build a composite world, a worldview of the information that we gather in this way. And you have another layer that draws its understanding not through the senses, but through the intuition. And as I say, the intuition is it's the intuitive portal, a portal to the soul. It is a whole different way of learning, a whole different way of experiencing, of knowing. And so the people that were looking at Jesus, that were, am I doing a little bit of a ring? Is there a little ring microphone. Could you pull that down just a little bit, the pulpit mic? People saw him and they wondered where he got this wisdom, and where he got his wisdom was intuitively. Jesus was an intuitive. He was a mystic. There are people today that still don't get this. They don't see these two ways of learning. We're focused most in the intellectual side, in the study of books, sitting at the feet of teachers, and so on. And so these theories have developed that Jesus went to India, for example, in the missing 18 years of his life, from age 12 to 30. That he must have gone to India to sit at the feet of the Eastern mystics to gather this information. And I think if that were true, that somebody would have mentioned that. Instead of saying, where did this guy get all this wisdom? They would have said, well, yeah, he's wise because he went to India. Nobody said that. And there's really nothing in his teachings that reflect anything of the Indian presentations other than the inner message, and he didn't have to go to India to get that. There are some that believe he went out into the desert and studied with the Essenes, and that's quite possible also. Both of these scenarios are possible. He could have gone to India, but the evidence doesn't really reflect that. He could have studied with the Essenes. But the point is, we're trying to figure out where he got his wisdom, and obviously it had to be from some external source. That's the conclusion. Because we all get wisdom from external sources, he must have gone someplace else. So why wouldn't these people have known that when they asked this question? They knew he hadn't studied with anyone. So that's what we're looking at today, and that's what we look at even in our own experience. These two layers exist, and the dominant layer is our intellectual nature. We learn through our eyes and through our ears and through the rest of our senses, the five senses. And the information that comes in, we build a composite of the world. And we take ourselves, we set it in the world, and we try to live a successful life, while the intuitive side that opens to the soul, the deeper level, the eternal nature, is more or less closed. It's not necessarily closed, it's never fully closed. But we are distracted. We live at the surface, at the senses level. And so we run into all these problems, and that's where the whole idea of soul evolution comes from. I'm not spiritually complete at this moment. And so I must have all these lessons, must go through all these experiences in life. And what I have compared this to, I'm going to write an article in my on my blog sometime this week, complete this article. I've already started. But the question is, are we here to learn? Are we here, why are we here? And the answer usually is to learn, so our souls can learn and evolve. What I would say, though, is that's a little like putting a blindfold on and sending a person out into a field full of pits and bogs and sharp stakes and blades and barbed wire fence and so forth, and say, go out there and see what you learn. See how much you learn. And so you go out and you stumble through all these obstacles. You get cut up and you get bruised and you have all these problems. You come back and take off the blindfold, and they say, well, what'd you learn? Well, I learned I don't like spikes, and I don't like falling in pits, and I don't like... Okay, so did you learn enough to avoid those? Well, I don't know. So put the blindfold back on and go back out and do it again. What did you learn? What good is that knowledge? What could we learn here on this planet that would improve the condition of our soul? That's the point. What if you take the blindfold off and walk through the same field? Everything you learn with the blindfold on is irrelevant, has nothing to do with you without a blindfold. As a matter of fact, you can be so good at living in that field that you can actually get creative. It can be a creative endeavor. Because you're not dealing with all the slings and arrows, wondering what you're supposed to learn from getting poked and jabbed and cut. So when we talk about this life as a schoolroom, a schoolhouse, and I used to believe this and I used to teach it, that life is a school and we've come here to learn, we come back multiple times, just like going through different grades until we one day graduate. But again, that would be like putting on a blindfold and going out into a field of obstacles and taking everything we learn with a blindfold on and saying, why am I not advancing? Why do I keep falling down? Why do I keep getting cut and hurt? It's because that knowledge is worthless. It is of no value from the spiritual perspective. What is of value, what you should learn above all else, is take off the blindfold. That's the only thing we have to learn. You go through these horrific experiences and look at yourself and you say, okay, what am I supposed to learn from this? The answer is always the same. When you take the blindfold off in whatever experience you're in, that is, as you say, I'm not a physical being. I'm not a human being. I am a spiritual being going through a human experience. You take that blindfold off and you rise to a level where that is incidental. That's not your life. This is a thing you're going through in your eternal life. And it's a thing you're going through because you have a body and probably were wearing a blindfold. And so you fell into a pit. As long as we have a body and as long as we're on this planet, we're going to have challenges. As Revelation says, there will always be wars and rumors of wars. You don't ever solve the last challenge. I wrote something about this with people. You know, if you think that you're going to rise so high that you're never going to have another person that upsets you in your life, as soon as you make peace with the last one, another one shows up. It's a thing that'll never be resolved. But it doesn't mean that we can't have a good experience, have a high experience while we're here. That we can't have a creative experience. And again, life without the blindfold, you probably wouldn't even pay attention to the obstacles. You might chop them up and use them for firewood. It is a whole different way to experience. But what we are saying with this whole spiritual evolution idea is that I'm not complete here. So I need to keep wearing this blindfold and go through life and hitting all of these problems. And one day, I'll take all this great knowledge I have learned from doing this, and I'll be enlightened. But the point is, as long as you're wearing the blindfold, you won't. As long as we embrace the idea that the soul is evolving, that we're incomplete because I can't see God right now, because something in me is closed up and I can't experience God, I must not be evolved. We've got to stop saying that. Maybe I can't see God at the moment, but it's because I've got a blindfold on, and I can take the blindfold off. I can adapt to this reality that is God. And that's really the ultimate prayer. It's the acknowledgement that in God I live and move and have my being. It's not going to get any closer. It's already here. Can't possibly get closer, but I can take the blinders off. That's the adjustment. That's prayer. To make an adjustment is to say, I don't see God now, so how do I adjust my vision so I can? That's always the case. Whatsoever you ask for in prayer, believe you've received it. That's a shift in expectation. I've already received it, so I experience a level of peace that everything is unfolding and working out exactly as it should. It's a whole different mindset than, I wonder if God thinks I deserve this answer. Or maybe I'm blindfolded and running into pikes because there's something I have to learn from doing that. The only thing I learn when I touch a hot stove is that I don't want to do that again. It's like, do I have to do that is it a character builder? We say that sometimes. That pain and suffering builds character. It kind of does, but it builds character for the one that loves the blindfold. It gives you endurance. It gives some sort of justification for suffering. I'm suffering because I'm learning. I'm learning what on the deepest level I already know. So we can justify it in all kinds of ways, and saying that my soul is evolving is one of the worst justifications we can make. God does not make things incomplete. And I am the image and likeness of God, as you are. So that bit of logic, that bit of spiritual logic, is something we need to carry, because otherwise we're wearing the blindfold that does not allow us to see the truth. Even when we look at nature, all of creation is constantly tuning itself to its present environment. Any living form that does not do this successfully goes extinct. See, we think of evolution as this long road, that the evolutionary process is taking place over a long period of time, and that is really not true. It's true in one sense, but in the most important sense, all that creation has to do is live successfully in this now moment. And if it doesn't do that, it goes extinct. And why is that? It's because the whole universe is done. It's complete. Everything we need to live a successful life has been provided, and it's provided right now. So nature knows this, and it lives only as a process of tuning itself to its present environment. The dinosaurs were successful for about 150 million years. And I have a very good feeling that if that asteroid had not fallen 65 million years ago in the Yucatan, Mexico, that dinosaurs would still be the ruling living beings. They were very successful. They adapted to each moment, but the moment that asteroid hit, they couldn't adapt. They lost their ability to adapt, and a whole other kind of species could adapt and emerged, and that would be us, ultimately. But the thing that stopped them from continuing on was they could not adapt to their present condition. And apparently it was pretty horrific, and amazing that anything lived through that, as scientists describe it. But what happened, what caused the change, was not something that was buried in any soul of nature. It was the environment. They could not adapt to the environment. What is our environment? We're not adapting to Earth. I mean, the important thing is what is adapting to the earthly environment is the body. But what is adapting to the spiritual environment? We live and move and have our being in the environment of God. Are we adapted to that? Or have we shut that off? And that's the problem. Spiritual adaptation is a thing that takes place now. You don't wait to get to a point where you're so enlightened that you finally get it. And that's after many bumps and scrapes and scratches and hurts and heartbreaks and whatever. You don't evolve to that point. The atmosphere, the environment of God is present now. Are we adapting to that? Are we acknowledging that I am a complete soul at this moment, and I have the complete capacity to plug into this deeper reality. And again, we think of Jesus as an old soul. I've heard that many times and said it myself. That puts him on a timeline where he was a young soul and came back probably many times and became an old soul, an old wise soul, because he had so many experiences that he evolved. Jesus was a soul. You are a soul. I am a soul. The things Jesus did, we can do also, and greater things. If you're adapted to your spiritual environment, if you adapt to the understanding that you live and move and have your being in God right now, nothing's going to change on this front. Nothing needs to change. You don't need to develop any new faculties. We have the faculty that puts us in touch with that plugs us into that. And that is our intuitive nature, but we're so locked into the intellectual side that we don't experience it. So we think Jesus was something different from the rest of us. We treat him as another species. What we're calling a progression, moving from a lesser to a greater, more complex state, is really a perpetual adaptation to the present. This is a very different process that suggests all the pertinent forces of this universe are active and fully engaged now. It's a very important idea that the universe is not moving towards something. Evolution has no goal. Evolution has no goal. And that probably goes against everything you've ever heard. But it is something I read from an evolutionary scientist. Evolution is not moving towards something. Its whole point is to adapt to the now moment. That's what's evolution. That's what evolution is. When the environment changes, so does the species, so does the biological side. But the life force that animates the biology doesn't change. That's eternal. And that's what we are. That's what the soul is. We are the life the body carries as a vehicle, this thing we call a soul. And what we call consciousness is a conglomeration of ideas that we have gathered through the senses. And we have convinced ourselves that because I don't see God right now, I don't see God in his fullness, that I must not yet be capable because I'm not evolved yet. So as long as we keep telling ourselves that, we're saying evolution does have a goal, that I'm evolving towards something. And as long as I'm evolving towards something, it's like holding the carrot on the end of the stick. You'll never, ever, ever reach it. The traditional Christian has the answer for that, and that is one day we're all going to be wiped out, and those who are worthy are going to go to heaven, and those who are not will go to hell. That's the way they conclude this whole thing. They do not recognize that the kingdom of God is spread upon the earth, and we don't see it. They don't recognize that the creation is finished. It's not done adapting, because as long as there are changes in the environment, there will be adaptation. It's a necessary part of the whole process. But the biology that carries the spiritual level, the life force, that's what changes. The life force itself does not. That's why when you look at your cat, your dog, your parakeet, your fish, that you have this compatibility with them. You share something. We share something with animals. We share something with plants. We feel it. And that something is the life force, that creative life force we call God. It's expressing through all of us. It's not somewhere far off. We are proof that it's here. We are proof that it's here in its fullness. The only thing in creation, the only species in creation that is lost is humankind. And the reason we're lost is because we have this wonderful gift of imagination. We can imagine we're separate from our Creator. We can imagine that somewhere down the road we'll find our pot of gold. Somewhere down the road we'll be something more than we are now. We can imagine we're not complete. But that's not what the imagination is to be used for. The imagination is our faculty. It's a cutting-edge faculty that allows us to do all this technology and do all the stuff that we do. But not out of lack, out of a sense of completeness. We're not moving toward something. We're already here. All of the universe, all of nature is standing complete. Not trying to get to be something it's not or trying to be somewhere it's not. Just watch any animal. If you feed your birds, look at what they're doing. They're not, as Jesus pointed out, they're not getting the bird seed out of your feeder and putting it in bags and running home and storing it in cellars and barns. They're living fully in the here and now. And as I've asked before, have you ever seen a depressed sparrow? Sparrow thinking, gosh, I wish I was a robin. The robin is happy, as I say in my book, plucking worms from the ground, just as the eagle is happy soaring. The robin doesn't want to soar like the eagle. And the eagle certainly doesn't want to pluck worms from the ground. Nothing in nature is trying to be something else. It's not trying to get to some place it's not. That's not what evolution is about. Evolution is about survival of biology in a present environment. If you can't adapt to the present environment, you go extinct. Life itself does not go extinct, and that's what's pretty incredible. We've had 5 or 6 major extinctions in our Earth's history, and it keeps coming back. It comes back in different forms, but life comes back. We call this thing life. It's this energy that animates all these different forms. It keeps coming back. It's persistent. It's because it's the underlying reality. The form doesn't matter. The form adapts to the environment. But it is the environment that drives evolution. It's a pretty important idea, because then we say, okay, I'm in God now. I'm fully in God now. Why am I not experiencing that? Best question you can ask yourself. Do you want to? The man by the pool of Bethesda for 38 years struggled to get to the pool so he could be healed. Jesus comes along and kind of ruins that whole theory. You don't have to get to the pool. Do you want to be healed? Do you want to really look into this and say, okay, God is here in its fullness now. Why am I so unhappy? What is this blindfold I'm wearing? Am I willing to take a look at that? Am I willing to take time to be still and listen to this intuitive message, this rising of life in me that is trying to teach me in a way that is different from the sensual or sensus-based understanding? There's a different way of knowing. Like all of nature, we're designed to interface with this omnipresent reality we call God. We are designed now to do that. We have the full equipment right now. You don't have to be a mystic, prophet, anything different than you are now. You have the intuitive faculty. The question is, can you open it? Are you willing to open it? We won't eventually evolve to this capacity. We have it now. To think something so essential to our spiritual well-being is somehow withheld, that's an important idea. And I think I say in the program that you wouldn't do this with your kids. You wouldn't say to your kids, I know what's best for you, but I'm not going to tell you. We're going to keep this a great secret, and I'm going to watch you stumble through life, and I'm going to withhold this information until, I think you've had enough, and then I might share it with you. But to think something so essential to our spiritual well-being is somehow withheld, or that we have to earn it through lifetimes of searching, is spiritually illogical. That would go against the success God is seeking to have. Why would God put a hurdle in God's own way? Put this wonderful being that we call a human being with all these wonderful abilities, put it out there and then erase all thought that I could actually succeed as a spiritual being. It doesn't make any sense. I've got to come back over and over and over to learn lessons? I don't think so. Okay. So as I have said, if you have a topic you'd like me to talk about, I'll be happy to do that. And thank you for coming out, and we'll see you next